welcome to Face. I'm John Drayman. Thank you for tuning in. When we return, we'll visit with Michael Morgan, City of Glendale Historic Preservation Commissioner and founder of the preservation group Crescenta Valley Heritage. Tonight, he'll share the all but forgotten history of the Glendale Montrose Railway, and he'll tell the tragic tale of the runaway train on Dead Man's Curve. First, let's hear what our sponsors have to say, and then we'll be right back to visit with Michael Morgan up close, personal, and face to face. Welcome back. We're visiting face to face with Michael Morgan, City of Glendale Historic Preservation Commissioner and founder of Crescenta Valley Heritage. Michael, you're considered by most local historians to be the foremost authority on the Glendale Montrose Railway. The so-called white front or dinky cars that plied the Glendale Montrose line from roughly 1913 to 1930 speak of a simpler, more romantic, and frankly more practical time in Glendale's history, Glendale days gone by. Tell us the story of the Glendale Montrose Railway.
Well, let me set a picture. Glendale is an interesting kind of semi-rural town at the time. Who doesn't love to ride the rails? Get on any trolley anywhere. I defy you not to have a smile on your face. Well, the Glendale Montrose Railway was that kind of feeling. It grew up with Glendale. It had started in 1909, but by 1913 it morphed into almost an intra-urban, going from Glendale, the big city of Glendale, to the small outpost of Montrose. It had many different kinds of trolleys. The most famous of them are the dinky, which was a single truck burning. People would ride from Montrose, careening down the tracks to Glendale, or going home at night on the double truck burnies from a day working in Los Angeles. It basically had its heyday about 1924. It carried over 1 million people that year in a town that only had roughly 35,000 people. So it basically was the transportation system if you didn't have a car in Glendale.
One of the mysteries is a street downtown called Good Avenue. Who was E.D. Good, and what role did he play in the history of Glendale transit?
Well, Edgar Douglas Good is one of the people I would consider the Energizer Bunny of the history of Glendale. As far as transit goes, he was the Harriman, he was the Huntington of Glendale as far as transit goes. He raised money, he bought ties, he bought rails, and he had the line built from roughly Wilson and Glendale Avenue all the way to Eagle Rock, where you could ride the railway. And in March of 1909, there was a rail line which instantly doubled the property that he had bought, which was very good for E.D. Good. E.D. Good, though, was not really a railroad builder. He was somebody that wanted to be like Huntington, buy land, put in a rail line, sell the land very expensively, and retire. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work the way he wanted it to. He wanted to sell the rail line almost from the very beginning. Unfortunately, it was a teeny little rail line and nobody would buy it.
Many popular locales in Glendale today once played an integral role in Glendale's historic train history. Let me ask you to respond to some of them now for our viewers. The Whole Foods site on Glendale Avenue.
Probably the most historic site in Glendale as far as rail transit. It was originally the Los Angeles and Salt Lake Rail Yard. It had been built there prior to 1900 when it was the Los Angeles Transit, which was another rail line that came in. You used to be able to ride a steam engine, go all the way up to the end of the line. The end of the line was at Vertigo Park. Well, on one of the places that they needed to have freight, they made this rail line that was at Lexington, between Lexington and California. That's where Whole Foods is today. But that was the place where all of the cars, all of the furniture, all of the lumber came into Glendale from roughly 1900 until it closed in 1955. Anything that you wanted in 1920, and remember, Glendale in 1923 was considered the fastest growing city in America. It was the fastest growing city in America because all of this material came by Union Pacific train into that rail yard. It was a bustling place.
Second location, Verdugo Park.
Well, like I'd said before, the Los Angeles Transit had run a steam train up there in the 1890s. Vertigo Park was a mystical, magical place with the woodlands. People loved. Imagine taking a steam engine up to where Glendale College is today, getting out, walking into the woodlands and the trees and the streams, and coming back by steam engine today. It has been that way ever since. It's not quite as big as it used to be, but it's still a very magical place. And for the longest time, the city of Glendale didn't know what to do with it. One time they owned it, then they didn't own it. It was bought by Mr. Glassell and Mr. Pirtle. There was a dance hall there. They ran electric trolley line up there, and it's an interesting place.
And lastly, Michael, Anawalt Lumber in Montrose.
Well, Anawalt Lumber, it's the same thing as down at the Union Pacific Yard. Without Anawalt Lumber, there wouldn't be any Montrose. Anawalt Lumber is a place where the trolley barn is. It's one of the last vestiges of the Glendale Montrose Railway. If you go into their back where they store their wood, that is the trolley barn. You can look down at the floor and you can see the rails of the Glendale Montrose Railway. You look in the rafters and you can see the overhead. You can see the insulators that kept the trolley wire. It is a historic site in its own entity. It's the largest building in 1918 in Montrose. It said basically to the world that Montrose had arrived, that, you know, put your money down here, buy your lot, and live here.
Now, I have to ask you here. There are stories of students traveling on the Glendale-Montrose rail line intentionally derailing the trolley cars in order to play hooky from school. True or false?
Very true. Very true. It's they ran these single truck, which meant that there was one truck on the trolley car, and going down the hill, the students that were coming from the Crescenta Valley, they would get to the back of the trolley car and they would jump up and down. The car was not very heavy, and this would cause the single truck to derail. Once it derailed, you would have to have something come from the Glendale Montrose, their wrecker come and put it back on the line, which meant that basically you were had hooky for the day. You know, so we didn't know how it got derailed, but we're free from school for a whole day. It was kind of like a snow day.
When we return, Michael will share the tragic tale of the runaway train on Dead Man's Curve. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Michael, before the break, we spoke about the practical need for the Glendale-Montrose Railway in the teens, 20s, and 1930s, and we also spoke about the romance of local train transit. But the Glendale-Montrose rail line also had its share of heroism and drama. Tell us about the runaway train on Dead Man's Curve.
This date, November 30th, 1923, was the Glendale-Montrose Railway's most heroic and saddest day in the 21-year history of the Glendale Montrose Railway. It dawned bright and clear up near Vertigo Park. 3 gentlemen who worked for the Union Pacific Railroad were going up there to a siding in Vertigo Park to pull out the tower car that was behind the brand new 1923 $30,000 Glendale Montrose electric freight locomotive, the pride of the G&M. They came up there, they pulled out the freight locomotive and pulled it onto the main siding, and basically then pulled out the tower car that was behind it. Now, a tower car is used for working on the trolley wire, the wire that is up ahead, the 600 volts that basically powers the trolleys that ran on the Glendale and Montrose. The city fathers had decided in 1923 that they had had enough with steam running up Glendale Avenue. It was just not what a progressive city in 1923 did, so they encouraged the Union Pacific to electrify their line that was south of Glendale and Broadway down to what is called Glendale Junction, which is where Vertigo and San Fernando meet. Because of this, they were in a rush to electrify this part of the line. So basically, the 3 gentlemen came up to the park. It was a balmy, nice fall day. They pulled out the engine, like I had said, the electric freight engine, put it on the main line, and were proceeding to pull the tower car out. They pulled the tower car out to the main line, and it parked it there, put on the air brakes, and were walking back to the freight locomotive, which was not needed for that day, and we're going to put it back on the siding. While they were walking to the car, all of a sudden, Mr. Annis turned around and said, "The car's got away." And they looked at it and they realized the car's air brakes had failed and it was proceeding to travel south towards Glendale city itself. So being railroad men, the first thing they decided to do was they were going to give chase. They jumped onto the freight locomotive, which was still on the main line. R.E. Meade, who was the supervisor, was operating the car, and Mr. Annis and Mr. Bainbridge stood on the footboards in the front of the car. Now, the footboards are just a few inches above the rails themselves. There's not much to hang on to, but there are some grab irons, and they proceeded to give chase. By this time, the tower car had picked up speed. It was going from 10 to 20, steel wheels on steel rails. With the wind in their face, the gentlemen that worked for the Union Pacific gave chase. They were chasing down the Verdugo Canyon. The wind, like I said, was in their face. They were determined to stop this car at any cost, because had this tower car proceeded on into Glendale and had made it to Glendale and Broadway, there could have been an accident. There could have been fatalities. This was something that railroad men did not do. So they were chasing after, and the car picked up speed. By the time it reached where Mountain Street is today, they estimated that the speed of the tower car was approximately 30 miles an hour, with this electric freight locomotive giving chase with these two men basically hanging on the very front for their dear lives, but willing to risk that to jump from one car to another, because they would have to pull the trolley pole to unpower the tower car. As they proceeded, they got closer and closer. The wheels were revolving. You could hear the screeching as they were rounding the curbs. Like I said, the wind was in their face. They realized that Glendale was coming up quick and they had to do something. So they proceeded to power on. They were 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, and 40 miles an hour. And by the time they had reached Monterey and Glendale Avenue, they were almost up to 40 miles an hour, witnesses said. They proceeded down. They were down by Doran Street by this time, when basically the freight locomotive and the tower car were touching ends. They were proceeding, Mr. Annis and Mr. Bainbridge were proceeding to jump onto the car. Right before that, coming up on the same track, unfortunately at this time, was a steam locomotive, UP-42s. As they got to Doran Street, like I said, they were touching the bumpers between the two of them. R.E. Meade looked ahead and he saw that the steam engine was coming up. At the same time, the steam locomotive engineer looked north and saw this tower car coming right at him. He put the steam locomotive, its brakes on it. It basically screeched to a halt. Well, the tower car was coming closer and closer. Mr. Annis realized that there was going to be a collision. He bailed out. But unfortunately, or fortunately in a sad way, Mr. Bainbridge continued with his job to stop the tower car and save the citizens of the city of Glendale. R.E. Meade put on the brakes, and with a screech, the G&M freight locomotive started screeching, but there just wasn't enough space between them. The tower car crashed into the steam locomotive at the same moment that E.M. Bainbridge jumped. Mr. Bainbridge was thrown to the side. When the dust cleared, they realized that Mr. Bainbridge was in a very bad way. Luckily, he was very close to a hospital, which is the Glendale Research Hospital. They basically put him on a stretcher and rushed him over to the hospital. He lingered for most of the day. Sadly, by about 1:30 in the afternoon, now this had happened at 8:30, he passed from internal injuries. So it was very sad that somebody so young died. He was shipped to his family. He was sole support for his family in a town called Leander, Texas, which at the time was about 1,000 people. But the people were very proud of what he had done. They built a big monument to him, and it's today at the Leander Cemetery in Texas. Unfortunately, in Glendale, there's no indication that there ever was a major railroad accident on Glendale Avenue at all. The electric freight locomotive survived, much to the joy of the Glendale and Montrose Railway, who hadn't paid off their $30,000 yet and were still going to use it for the next 8 years. That electric freight motor survives today at the Orange Empire Railway Museum, as we've indicated before. But it's a sad thing when I go to that spot at Lexington and Glendale and see that there's no indication that a man gave his life for his fellow men in the city of Glendale.
I'd like to thank Michael Morgan for keeping this history alive and for his service on the Glendale Historic Preservation Commission. For surely a great city's future will one day become its prized and cherished historic past.